Elon Musk sat quietly at his desk, savoring a rare moment of calm in a life dominated by relentless innovation and ambition. The idea came to him during a casual conversation with a colleague about human nature. What if no one recognized him? How would they treat a stranger who seemed to have lost everything? The thought grew, evolving into an intriguing personal experiment. Several weeks later, on a cloudy Thursday afternoon, the plan was finalized. His disguise was deliberately modest yet convincing. He chose a worn outfit from a local thrift store, frayed pants, a faded shirt, and sneakers that looked ready to give out. A scruffy wig and some subtle makeup completed the transformation, obscuring the well-known features splashed across magazines and media. The result was startling. Elon Musk, the billionaire and visionary, now looked like an ordinary man struggling to make ends meet. His destination wasn't picked at random. It was the Copper Elm, a high-end restaurant in Santa Fe, New Mexico, celebrated for its exclusivity and elite clientele. This wasn't about humiliating anyone, but about studying human behavior. Would people see beyond appearances, or would they let looks guide their actions? Before leaving, he paused to inspect his reflection. The unfamiliar face staring back felt strange, almost eerie. For the first time in years, he felt unseen, unrecognizable, a man without the identity that had long defined him. Taking a steadying breath, he stepped out, his pulse quickening with anticipation. The drive to the restaurant was uneventful, the city alive with its usual rhythm. But for Elon, every second felt charged with purpose. Arriving at the Copper Elm, he paused briefly before pushing open the grand double doors, launching his experiment. The restaurant radiated elegance. Warm light spilled from glittering chandeliers onto tables set with precision, while soft murmurs of conversation mixed with the occasional clink of glassware. His entrance caused a faint stir. A few diners glanced up momentarily before returning to their meals, but the staff noticed. Their eyes lingered, curiosity etched on their faces. As Elon stepped onto the polished wood floor, he was acutely aware of every creak his battered shoes made. An impeccably dressed hostess in black approached him, her expression cautious yet polite. Her practiced smile faltered slightly as she noticed his appearance. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite yet tinged with unease. "Yes," Elon answered, his voice steady but quiet. "I'd like a table for one." The hostess glanced toward the bar, where the manager stood, his eyes fixed on the exchange. Her smile wavered further. "We're completely booked tonight," she said quickly, her gaze flickering toward a row of empty tables. Elon noticed the glance, but remained silent, letting the discomfort settle in the air. Across the room, a young server named Grace caught sight of the interaction. She had only been working at the Copper Elm for a few months, saving up to pursue her dream of culinary school. Something about the man's calm, yet intentional demeanor intrigued her. It wasn't pity she felt, but a sense of curiosity. "He can sit in my section," Grace called out, stepping forward before the hostess could turn him away. The room fell silent for a moment. All eyes turned to her, including the managers, who frowned but chose not to intervene. Elon offered Grace a faint smile as she led him to a table near the kitchen doors. It wasn't an ideal spot, but it was a seat, and he was grateful. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Grace nodded, placing a menu in front of him. "Take your time," she said warmly, ignoring the quiet murmurs that rippled through the room. As Elon flipped through the menu, he observed the diners around him. Their glances ranged from mild curiosity to open disdain. He caught snippets of whispered conversations, speculating about him and his presence there. The staff, wasn't much different. "What's he doing here?" one server asked loudly enough for him to hear. Another chimed in, "This'll scare off the regulars." Elon noted their reactions without a word, letting the scene unfold. When Grace returned to take his order, he chose something simple: soup and bread. "That's all?" she asked, her tone gentle but surprised. "That's all," Elon confirmed. Grace didn't press further. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the judgmental stares of the room. Though he could feel the weight of their gazes, it didn't bother him. If anything, it reinforced why he had come. People often spoke of compassion, but how often did they practice it when faced with someone they deemed different? The atmosphere in the room grew heavier with every passing moment as whispers circulated between diners. "What's management thinking? Letting someone like him in here?" a man at a nearby table muttered to his companion. Elon stayed composed, his focus shifting from one detail to the next. The hostess deliberately avoiding his gaze. The bartender laughing softly with another server, the manager throwing occasional glances of disapproval. Each reaction painted a vivid picture of how deeply appearances shaped judgment. Grace returned with his meal, a steaming bowl of tomato bisque and a small basket of bread. She set the dishes down with the same care she gave to every customer. "Enjoy your meal," she said, her smile sincere. "Thank you," Elon replied, meeting her eyes. He could sense her kindness went beyond duty. It was genuine. As he ate, Elon watched Grace move briskly between tables, her calm demeanor never faltering. She worked tirelessly, ensuring each patron received the attention they expected. Elon observed as she handled even the most difficult customers with remarkable poise. Her patience held steady, even in the face of occasional snide remarks. At one moment, an older woman flagged Grace down, her expression clearly annoyed. "Why are you wasting time on him?" the woman asked, nodding subtly in Elon's direction. "People like that don't belong here." Grace's cheeks turned pink, but her calm demeanor didn't falter. "Everyone deserves respect, ma'am," she responded firmly. The older woman huffed and returned to her meal without another word. Elon felt a surge of admiration for Grace. It wasn't easy to defend someone society looked down upon, especially in a place like this. As he finished his soup, a different server, a young man in his late 20s, approached with a stiff attitude. "Are you going to order anything else?" the server asked, his tone edged with irritation. "No, thank you," Elon answered evenly. The server gave him a tight-lipped smile and walked off, muttering under his breath. Elon caught the words, "waste of space," and tucked them away in his mind. Across the room, a young couple exchanged uneasy glances. "What if he asks us for money?" the woman whispered. Her partner shrugged, but his uncomfortable expression matched hers. Through it all, Elon stayed composed, his thoughts racing. This wasn't just about how he was treated, it was about the assumptions people made about him without knowing a thing. As Grace cleared his table, she paused. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. Elon looked up, surprised by her question. "Yes, thank you for your kindness," he replied. Her face softened, and she nodded before moving on. In that fleeting moment, Elon saw what he had been searching for, a glimmer of compassion in a sea of judgment. The tension in the restaurant lingered, but Elon's thoughts were sharp and clear. The experiment was yielding more insights than he expected, and the next phase would push things further. The atmosphere grew taut as Elon stood from his table. His meal was done, but his purpose there was not. Slowly he walked to the center of the room, every step drawing stares from staff and diners alike. Grace, balancing a tray of empty glasses, paused, her gaze fixed on him with curiosity. The manager, who had been observing from a distance, hurried over, ready to intervene. "Excuse me, sir," the manager said briskly. "If you're finished, I'll need to ask you to leave. Our establishment—" Elon raised a hand, stopping him with a quiet but firm gesture. "I'll leave shortly," he said, his tone calm yet commanding. "But first, I need to say something." The room fell silent. The diners, who had spent the evening casting sidelong glances and whispering, now looked at him with a mix of curiosity and annoyance. Elon reached up, pulling off the wig that had concealed his identity. A ripple of gasps swept through the room as his familiar face came into view. "Elon Musk," someone whispered, disbelief coloring their voice. He let the recognition sink in before he spoke again. "Yes, it's me," he said, his gaze sweeping over the room. "Tonight, I didn't come here as the person you think you know. I came as someone most of you wouldn't even notice." The silence deepened as his words carried through the room. "I wanted to see how people treat someone they consider beneath them," he continued, his voice steady but tinged with disappointment. "And what I saw was judgment. I heard the whispers. I felt the disdain, all because of how I looked." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But one person, just one, showed kindness and respect." His eyes found Grace, who stood frozen, her tray still in hand. "Grace," he called, motioning for her to step forward. "You didn't know who I was, but you treated me like a human being. That's the kind of character that truly matters." Grace's face turned crimson as she set her tray down and walked hesitantly toward him. "I was just doing my job," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "No," Elon said, shaking his head. "You went beyond that. You showed empathy when it would have been easier to turn away." The room turned their eyes to Grace, their expressions shifting from guilt to admiration. Elon faced the crowd once more. "To those of you who judge me tonight, take this as a reminder. Appearances can be deceiving. How you treat others says far more about you than you might realize." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small envelope and handing it to Grace. "This is for you," he said simply. With trembling hands, Grace carefully opened it. Inside, she found a handwritten note and a check. Her voice quivered as she read the note aloud. "Grace, thank you for your kindness. Use this to chase your dreams. Culinary school, your own restaurant, whatever path you choose. The world needs more people like you." Her voice cracked as she reached the final words. Tears streamed down her cheeks. The check, written for $50,000, slipped from her grasp as gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Elon turned his attention to the manager. "Consider this a reminder to foster respect for everyone who steps into this restaurant." The manager, visibly shaken, nodded without a word. The dining room fell into a stunned hush. As Elon moved toward the door, he paused and turned back to Grace. "Don't ever lose that kindness. It's rare and it's powerful." With that, he stepped outside, the door closing softly behind him. Inside, the silence lingered, heavy with the weight of reflection. The patrons, who had whispered cruel remarks earlier, now shifted awkwardly in their chairs. Faces flushed with shame, some avoided eye contact, while others fidgeted with their utensils. Grace stood motionless at the center of it all, clutching the note tightly. Her emotions swirled. gratitude, disbelief, and quiet pride. The manager hesitantly approached her, his usual confidence replaced with uncertainty. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said, his voice subdued. Grace looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she replied, her tone measured, distant. She knew he had been among the first to doubt Elon's presence. His change in demeanor felt like too little, too late. At a nearby table, a father who had openly stared at Elon earlier leaned in to speak to his teenage son. He sighed heavily, guilt evident in his expression. "We shouldn't have judged him like that," he admitted. The boy nodded quietly. Across the room, a woman dabbed at her tear-streaked face with a napkin. Her voice trembled as she turned to her partner. "What if we've treated others the same way? People we never gave a second thought to?" Grace quietly went back to her work, clearing plates and resetting tables, her heart full but heavy with the night's revelations. But the weight of the evening still hung in the air. Each interaction Grace had with customers that night carried an unspoken acknowledgement, a mutual realization of a lesson they hadn't anticipated learning. As the shift neared its end, she stepped into the kitchen for a brief moment of solitude. She pulled out the note Elon had left, rereading it carefully. Beneath his message of thanks, he had added a final thought. Kindness is the currency that never loses its value. Keep spending it. Her chest tightened with emotion as she slipped the note back into her apron pocket. Those words were a powerful reminder of what truly mattered. When the last table was cleared and the team began tidying up, the atmosphere in the restaurant felt noticeably altered. It was quieter, more thoughtful, absent of the usual light-hearted chatter. The staff gathered for their end-of-shift meeting as they always did. But this time, it felt different. The manager, normally upbeat, addressed them with an unusually serious tone. "Tonight was different," he said, carefully choosing his words. "I think there's a lot for us to reflect on after what happened. Let's make sure this place genuinely represents the values we claim to uphold." Grace caught a few glances from her colleagues, some offering quiet, respectful smiles. She didn't crave their validation, but it felt reassuring to know her choices hadn't gone unnoticed. As she walked out that night, the envelope safely tucked in her bag, a sense of clarity and purpose settled over her. The money would undoubtedly change her life, but what she'd experienced would shape how she viewed the world forever. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual energy, but for Grace, everything seemed more vivid, more alive. Elon Musk's unexpected experiment had left its mark on her, on the restaurant, and on everyone who had been there that evening. In the end, it wasn't just about the money or the fame. It was a testament to how a single act of kindness, even in the most unassuming moment, could ripple outward and leave a profound impact. In the days that followed, news of Elon Musk's undercover experiment spread rapidly. Social media buzzed with conversations, the story captivating millions. Headlines ranged from "Elon Musk tests humanity at fine dining restaurant" to "Billionaire rewards act of kindness in unexpected experiment." The copper elm found itself at the center of national attention, some of it glowing, some of it critical. Stories about the initial reactions of the staff and guests sparked both outrage and reflection. Comment sections became battlegrounds for debates about empathy, societal bias, and the influence of appearances on behavior. As for Grace, her life changed overnight. Reporters clamored to hear her side of the story, eager for her perspective on the event. Though initially overwhelmed by the sudden attention, she eventually decided to share her thoughts. It wasn't about knowing who he was. she explained to one journalist. It was about treating someone with dignity, no matter their circumstances. That's something we should strive for, not just for billionaires in disguise, but for everyone. The $50,000 check allowed Grace to pursue a dream she had long believed was out of reach, attending culinary school. But more importantly, the experience gave her a platform to advocate for compassion and inclusivity within the service industry and beyond. Elon, meanwhile, reflected on the night in private. Months later, in a rare interview, he spoke briefly about the event. It reminded me that the smallest actions can reveal the biggest truths, he said. Kindness isn't about grand gestures, it's in the choices we make every day. The Copper Elm underwent changes too. Management introduced new training programs that emphasized empathy and respect for all guests, regardless of their appearance. Staff members who had been dismissive that night found themselves rethinking their actions and biases. For everyone who had been in the restaurant that evening, the lessons endured. Many returned to their routines with a fresh outlook, holding on to the memory of that night as a lasting lesson in kindness. Ultimately, Elon's experiment turned into more than just a tale of a disguised billionaire. It delivered a profound message about the enduring value of humanity, one that surpasses money, social standing, and appearances. As the world continued forward, Grace and those present that night carried with them the impact of a single act of generosity. It was a reminder that in a culture fixated on external achievements, true character reveals itself most clearly in unexpected moments.